As London marked the 80th anniversary of VE Day, with parades and ceremonies to remember the past, something unexpected happened. Something that no one saw coming, but everyone would remember. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and little Prince Louis appeared with their parents. The royal children, who hadn't been seen together in public for months, had suddenly shown up at the Queen Victoria Memorial. People in the crowd started whispering. Phones came out. Photos were taken. And, just like that, the focus of the day shifted. For a few moments, the royal family didn't feel far away or out of reach. They felt close. They felt real. The last time anyone had seen the three children was on Christmas Day at Sandringham. Since then, they'd stayed out of the spotlight. Even at Easter, William and Catherine chose not to attend the usual church service, which left many people wondering, were they stepping back, taking time away from the public eye, or just trying to protect their children from the constant attention? Whatever the reason, their return on VE Day felt important. It wasn't random. It meant something. As they walked together, with King Charles and Queen Camilla beside them, people noticed what was happening. 3 generations of the royal family were standing together, honoring the past, but also showing the future. George looked calm and serious. Charlotte stood tall and graceful. And Louis? He was the smallest of the 3, full of energy, and already stealing the spotlight without even trying. It wasn't just a nice moment, it was something special. These events are usually very planned. Every step is timed, every moment is polished. But this time felt different. It was natural. It was full of emotion. People weren't just watching a ceremony, they were watching a family. A family that seemed strong, close, and full of life. And at a time when the monarchy needed something real to hold on to, this moment delivered exactly that. The response was instant. Online, royal fans and news outlets lit up. But not because of the tradition or fancy clothes, it was because of how simple and honest the moment felt. A dad, a mom, and their 3 kids showing up to remember the heroes of the past. But that wasn't even the part that took over the internet. What truly grabbed everyone's heart happened just a few minutes later, a small moment, easy to miss, but one that people would be talking about long after the ceremony was over. A moment between a father and his young son. A moment no one planned. A moment that would quietly steal the show and leave the world feeling something real again. They were dressed in deep navy, the color of ceremony, tradition, and quiet dignity. But beneath the formal tailoring and polished shoes was something far more captivating, something real. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis didn't just walk onto the stage of national remembrance. They glided into it with a confidence that felt inherited, yet untouched by arrogance. Their navy blue outfits matched their father's military attire, a deliberate nod to unity. But what stood out wasn't the perfection of their appearance. It was the sincerity in their actions. They weren't there as props in a royal photograph. They were there as participants in a story still being written. As the crowd watched, the children approached veterans with a confidence far beyond their years. There were no forced smiles or rehearsed handshakes. George held his gaze steady. Charlotte leaned in as if she genuinely wanted to hear every word. And Louis, the youngest, stood at his father's side with the sort of bright-eyed curiosity that defied royal stiffness. These were not robotic heirs to a throne. These were children raised to understand duty through empathy, not ego. And it showed. When they took their seats beside King Charles and Queen Camilla, the visual spoke louder than any speech. 3 generations of royalty, shoulder to shoulder, eyes on the past while standing firmly in the present. The gravity of the occasion, honoring the 80th anniversary of VE Day, seemed to press down on the stone and the ceremony. But then came the contrast. The children, in their coordinated formality, brought a softness to the scene. They didn't shatter the moment's solemnity. They elevated it. With every glance, every whisper between siblings, every small fidget of discomfort, they reminded the world that behind the gold and history, this was still a family. Yet even amid that elegance, something quietly began to shift. It started subtly. Prince Louis, seated beside his father, grew restless in the most human of ways. His small hands moved, his eyes darted. And while the world watched the grand procession, Something else was happening right there in the front row, a moment so ordinary, it almost felt sacred. This wasn't just another photo op for the Royal Archive. It was the setup to a gesture that would steal the entire show. Because within all that carefully constructed elegance, one small boy was about to do something so unscripted, so tender, and so disarmingly real, it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the modern monarchy. While thousands lined the streets and millions tuned in from around the world, all eyes were fixed on the grandeur, the pageantry, the legacy, the roaring echo of drums across the stone avenues of London. But in a single, unguarded moment, the spectacle faded, and the world turned its gaze, not toward the soldiers or the salutes, but toward a boy just 6 years old whose quiet, instinctive act captured the heart of a nation. As Prince William sat upright in his military uniform, eyes forward, shoulders squared, his youngest son, Prince Louis, leaned over and gently brushed off his father's shoulder. It was so quick, so innocent, so unexpected, that at first it almost went unnoticed. But those who caught it couldn't look away. There was no cue. No press camera was aimed. No court official whispered a prompt. It wasn't rehearsed, polished, or even understood in the moment by the man it was directed toward. But it was real. And because it was real, it was unforgettable. A tiny hand reached up not to seek attention, but to give it. Not to pose, but to help, to care. In that fleeting act, something deeper was revealed, something far more powerful than any royal wave or balcony appearance. It was a gesture of love, unfiltered and pure, bridging the formality of royalty with the quiet truth of fatherhood. Suddenly, the parade was no longer the headline. The military procession, the trumpet fanfare, the solemn ceremonies honoring the heroes of the past, they all took a back seat. What dominated the front pages, the morning talk shows, and the digital feeds across every platform was that one small sweep of the hand. Prince Louis, the spirited royal who once covered his ears on a palace balcony and made faces during a coronation, had done something different this time. He had shown us the monarchy's most important transformation, one that couldn't be declared in speeches or carved into stone. A transformation not about power, but about presence. Not about dominance, but about devotion. Within hours, the clip went viral, reposted, replayed, and reinterpreted by millions. "So adorable," one comment read. "That's what love looks like," said another. But beneath the smiles and emojis lay a resonance much deeper. People weren't just reacting to cuteness. They were responding to what it symbolized. The possibility that even inside one of the most rigid institutions in the world, moments of tenderness, unscripted and sincere, could still exist. That maybe the monarchy wasn't just evolving, it was healing, becoming human again. The beauty of Louis's gesture wasn't just in its sweetness. It was in its clarity. It said more than any royal spokesperson ever could. That a father's uniform might be adorned with medals, but it's a child's hand that keeps it real. That titles and crowns mean little if they aren't backed by warmth, by connection, by love so instinctual it doesn't need permission to be shown. And as the applause of the parade faded into memory, it became clear this wasn't just a moment between father and son. It was a message that the future of royalty might just depend on the kind of authenticity that can't be taught but must be felt. Yet, as the dust settled and the world caught its breath, something else began to emerge, a realization that this act wasn't just touching, it was telling. Because behind Louis's spontaneous affection, behind that small motion of care, there was a deeper story forming. One that couldn't be captured in a single video clip or viral tweet. A story about who Prince William truly is as a father, and what kind of king he might one day become. Prince William felt it, the small hand of his son brushing against the fabric of his uniform. And in that moment, without disrupting the flow of the conversation he was engaged in, he reached out with a subtle, instinctive motion. A father's quiet response. A touch on the arm. A confirmation. "I see you. I'm here." No words were spoken, and yet the entire world heard everything that needed to be said. Because in that one unscripted interaction, William reminded us all of a truth often buried beneath the weight of royal protocol. that the most powerful forms of leadership sometimes speak in silence. Across social media, the clip was dissected frame by frame. Analysts could comment on statecraft, constitutional precedent, or royal traditions, but none of that mattered here. What people wanted to talk about was this: how a future king, born and bred in the realm of stoic restraint, managed to radiate warmth without ever breaking royal posture. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but the message was thunderous. He wasn't just acknowledging his son, he was teaching by example. Teaching that tenderness is not weakness, that presence doesn't require grand declarations. That love, when genuine, finds a way to be heard even in the silence. Royal watchers praised his ability to stay composed under scrutiny, yet remain deeply connected. Parenting, for William, isn't something he performs for cameras. It's a bond that operates beneath the surface, in the pauses, in the glances, in those fleeting moments where nothing is said, but everything is understood. It wasn't performative affection. It was authentic fatherhood. And in that setting, surrounded by dignitaries and soldiers and centuries of tradition, it was revolutionary. Fans weren't just moved, they were inspired. What followed wasn't just admiration, it was reflection. Parenting blogs, podcasts, and everyday people began pointing to the clip as a case study in emotional intelligence. How to stay grounded while carrying pressure. How to be present without demanding attention. It wasn't a royal moment, it was a human one. And in that humanity, William became more than a symbol. He became relatable. Real. The contrast was impossible to ignore. This was the man who had walked behind his mother's coffin at just 15, who'd been raised in the unforgiving spotlight of both monarchy and media, who had spent a lifetime mastering composure. And now, as a father, he was rewriting the manual, not through policy or performance, but through touch, through instinct, through love that didn't need to be explained. And that's when people began realizing this wasn't just a sweet moment, it was a statement, one that would echo beyond the parade grounds and into the future of the royal legacy. Prince George, the future king, carries the weight of legacy. In his posture, serious, reserved, already showing signs of the monarch he will become. Princess Charlotte radiates grace, with a calm elegance far beyond her years. But Prince Louis? He was always different. And in a family bound by centuries of expectations, it is that difference that has made him unforgettable. From the very beginning, Louis has moved through the public eye with a sense of unfiltered freedom. He laughs too loudly. He waves too enthusiastically. And in doing so, he disarms the world. Because in a monarchy often cloaked in formality, Louis represents something far more powerful, genuine emotion. This wasn't the first time he'd gone viral. Who could forget his playful antics during the Platinum Jubilee? Or the way he once defiantly covered his ears while jets thundered overhead? But those weren't just childlike moments, they were revelations. Each time Louis veered from the script, the public leaned in, hungry for proof that behind the polished royal portraits, there lived a child who was wonderfully real. And now, brushing his father's shoulder in the middle of a national ceremony, he proved once again why he stands apart. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't mischief, it was connection, it was instinct, and most of all, it was love. His bond with Prince William isn't performative, it pulses through every interaction. There's a comfort between them, a rhythm that suggests hours spent away from cameras, in quiet rooms where a child learns not just how to behave, but how to feel safe. Louis doesn't need to ask for permission to touch his father. He just does. Because the space between them isn't defined by titles, but by trust. And that trust is what allows Louis to be so open, so spontaneous, so unlike what anyone expects from a child raised in a palace. It's that openness that continues to captivate. He doesn't play the role of the dutiful royal, he plays himself. And in doing so, he's become the heartbeat of a generation of royals, who may finally be learning how to lead with something deeper than protocol. Louis is joy in its purest form. He's not constrained by optics or obsessed with image. And perhaps that's exactly what the monarchy has needed all along, not another symbol, but a soul. Someone who reminds us that behind the velvet ropes and military marches, there's still a boy reaching out to help his father. Yet, even as the world melted over that one innocent gesture, something lingered in the air. A question. A sense that we hadn't seen the last of Louis's magic. Because while that moment had already captured hearts across the globe, it was becoming clear Prince Louis wasn't finished stealing the spotlight. In fact, what he did next would only deepen the love and challenge everything we thought we understood about how royalty is supposed to act. Duty and decorum? That's what the monarchy has been built on for centuries. But for William and Catherine, something else has always mattered more. Something deeper than appearances. More enduring than protocol. In a world that expects every royal move to be measured, rehearsed, and filtered through centuries of tradition, they made a quiet but radical choice to prioritize their family over the throne. When Easter arrived and the press waited for the traditional royal walk to church, the headlines were left blank. The Wales family didn't show. No grand entrance. No waving to the crowds. Instead, they chose something almost unthinkable in royal circles. They vanished. Not out of defiance, but devotion. They were in Norfolk, hidden from cameras, protected by silence, wrapped in the kind of peace only real love makes possible. It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. Because for William and Catherine, parenting isn't a photo opportunity, it's a calling. The decision to step back from the spotlight isn't about rebellion, it's about preservation. They're raising future leaders, yes, but also future humans. Children who laugh too loud, ask awkward questions, and make impulsive gestures in the middle of a military parade. And that's what makes their story so powerful. Because while the palace walls may demand restraint, the Wales family continues to choose something far more rare in royal bloodlines: authenticity. You can see it in Louis, the boy who instinctively dusts his father's shoulder in front of thousands. That simple act didn't come from nowhere. It was born out of a household that values emotional openness, a space where a child is allowed to be messy, expressive, alive. And that's no accident. It's the direct result of Catherine's fiercely, hands-on approach. She isn't just a duchess or a princess. She's a mother, first one who reads bedtime stories, kneels to eye level, and guards her children like a lioness behind palace gates. Her influence is undeniable, not because of what she wears or how she curtsies, but because of what she shields her children from: the weight of expectation before they're ready to carry it. Even their public appearances feel different. There's a looseness, a fluidity, a sense that what you're seeing isn't entirely staged. While other royal moments feel choreographed down to the second, the Wales family often lets the unexpected happen. A whisper, a giggle, a wandering glance. They let their children be present not as porcelain dolls of legacy, but as participants in the moment. And that is what draws the public in. Not because everything is perfect, but because it's not. And as they stepped away from the cameras, that day, after Louis's small, world-shaking gesture, the silence spoke volumes. The roar of jet engines and fanfare faded, but the emotional imprint only deepened. Because what lingered wasn't the image of uniforms and medals. It was the quiet presence of a family that continues to reshape what it means to be royal. Not through statements or speeches, but through choices, through presence, through love that breaks the mold. As the nation stood still to remember the sacrifices of a generation long gone, the 80th anniversary of VE Day arrived not with quiet reflection, but with thunderous pageantry. The skies roared with the sound of fighter jets, the ground trembled beneath the synchronized footsteps of 1,300 troops, and the eyes of millions turned to Buckingham Palace. But this year felt different. It wasn't just the grandeur or the numbers. It was the absence that defined it, the first major VE Day commemoration without Queen Elizabeth II. Her reign, deeply entwined with the legacy of war and recovery, had always been a guiding presence on days like this. But now, the throne stood in transition, and the future had taken center stage. In her place stood King Charles, dignified and resolute, flanked by the next generation. And it was here, in this exact setting of tradition and tribute, that the unexpected happened. While history marched in uniform before the gates of royalty, a quiet exchange off to the side stole the world's heart. It wasn't part of the ceremony. It wasn't in the program. It was just a whisper. Princess Charlotte, leaning in to share a secret with her younger brother, Prince Louis. Whatever she said, it worked. A grin spread across his face, the kind of grin that can't be faked. And in that one moment, the entire tone shifted. Suddenly, the war memorial wasn't just a backdrop for political statements or military honors, it became a stage for humanity. Because in the midst of discipline and remembrance, the royal children offered something else: balance. Their innocence didn't diminish the solemnity of the day, it elevated it. Their laughter didn't distract from the legacy being honored, it refreshed it. And for royal watchers around the world, it was proof that the monarchy, though rooted in history, was learning to breathe differently, to feel differently, to exist in a world where sincerity was becoming more valuable than ceremony. What many noticed and praised wasn't the grandeur of the march or the size of the procession. It was the way these children, effortlessly and without awareness, brought warmth to a cold tradition. It was in how Prince George bowed slightly to a veteran, in how Princess Charlotte straightened her posture when her mother glanced over, and how Prince Louis, just moments after brushing his father's shoulder, looked around with wide, eager eyes, not to impress, but to understand. They weren't props, they weren't ornaments of power, they were participants. And that mattered, because in a world that has grown skeptical of crowns and bloodlines, gestures like these speak louder than royal decrees. They show a monarchy that no longer survives solely by the weight of its legacy, but by the emotional connection it builds with the people it serves. And so, while the military marched and the RAF flew overhead, something else was rising beneath the surface. A new kind of heroism, one that doesn't wear medals, but offers moments. One that doesn't fight wars, but heals divides with empathy and authenticity. Which brings us to the deeper question: what does this say about the royal family today? Not just as figureheads of a fading empire, but as people, as parents, as children, as symbols redefined not by their history, but by how deeply they're willing to feel. Because what happened that day wasn't just a tribute to the past, it was a glimpse of the future, and it looked remarkably, refreshingly human. It lasted just a second. A quiet flick of the hand, a child's spontaneous act, unnoticed by many, in real time, yet destined to ripple across the world. Prince Louis, brushing dust from his father's shoulder, wasn't just a sweet moment between parent and child. It became something far bigger. In that split second, it shattered the centuries-old wall between royalty and reality. No speeches, no titles, no tradition, just love. Simple, pure, instinctive love. And that's why the world hasn't stopped talking about it since. Because in a monarchy that has often relied on rehearsed formality and carefully curated appearances, this was something so raw, so vulnerable, so undeniably human, it couldn't be ignored. That single act said everything words never could. Our future king sat in full uniform, surrounded by cameras, ceremony, and the burden of legacy. And next to him, his son, just a boy, reached out, not because he was told to, but because he cared. That's the power of modern fatherhood. That's the power of real connection. And in a world where public figures so often hide behind polish and performance, Louis's gesture reminded us all what we truly crave: authenticity. People are tired of perfection. They don't want cold pageantry. They want warmth. They want truth. They want to believe that even inside the most impenetrable institutions, love still finds its way to the surface. Prince Louis gave us that belief. Not with a crown, not with a title, but with a child's quiet instinct to care. That gesture wasn't rehearsed, and that's exactly why it mattered. Because in a moment when the world was watching for power, it found humanity instead. And now, that moment has become more than just a headline. It's a turning point, a reminder that perhaps the future of the monarchy doesn't rest in bloodlines or centuries-old rules, but in moments like this, moments that show the royals not as symbols, but as people. People who feel, who love, who connect in ways that can't be scripted or controlled. In that light, Prince Louis isn't just the cheeky youngest child. He's becoming something far more meaningful. A symbol of warmth in a world that so often feels cold. And while the cameras moved on, while the crowds thinned and the headlines shifted to something new, One image stayed imprinted in the hearts of millions. Not the grandeur of the palace, not the medals or military salutes, but a small boy, reaching up to his father, unaware that the world was watching yet somehow showing it exactly what it needed to see. A quiet love, an honest moment, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something royal and real. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.